So we are 2 years and 9 flights into Starship's test campaign, and although it's certainly taken a little longer than we had hoped to get to this stage, with all the vehicle production and support infrastructure built and in the process of being built, this program, which seemed almost impossible to some, has seemingly now just been made late. Starship may be the world's most powerful rocket by a huge margin, but with the launch tower of Mechazilla managing to catch the Super Heavy booster out of the air repeatedly, we are quite soon about to head into the next set of challenges that SpaceX needs to tick off for missions to the Moon and Mars. Yes, we are diving into some fun topics around all of this.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Hey, Marcus House with you here, and to kick this off, I think it's worth noting how incredible it is to see what Super Heavy has already achieved. It really is amazing because, aside from anything else, it could already provide a massively upscaled partial reusability option similar to that of Falcon 9. Not only that, it uses a cleaner propellant. Go back a year or two and there was a lot of skepticism around SpaceX being able to make the Raptor engine. The argument was that they would never make this reliable enough, initially due to it being the first full-flow staged combustion engine to be used in flight, and secondly they crammed so many of them together. Now we watch them light up 33 together in this display. Yes, the disbelievers are fairly quiet about Raptor these days. At the time, people used to love sharing the story of the N1 rocket with its 30 engines on the first stage. They never managed to make it reliable and SpaceX wanted to use more, so yeah, there was no way, right? Well, we have come a long way since then, not only well surpassing anything done in the past, but with more complexity and scenes like this. Now, even though the Super Heavy booster will continue to be upgraded in its design, this is largely proven to do what it needs to already. Flights 5 and 6 proved that Starship's overall design can survive re-entry from orbital velocity and remain intact enough to still propulsively land. There are some big challenges left though, and achieving rapid reusability will certainly take a bunch of time and iteration. You awesome subscribers ask so many great questions about all of these problems to solve, and it's well past time that I came back with our thoughts here. If you have questions or want me to dive further into anything like we are talking about today, do let me know. The ultimate goal of Starship is obviously to provide transport to Mars, but also the Moon with the Artemis program. To date, there is a lot that we want to see and have been hoping to get further information on. Starship's heat shield, as one example, is going to evolve and need testing with a number of materials and options for years to come. This is an obvious continual challenge that we are aware of, but given that we've seen re-entry and incredible control before a flip and landing, I really do believe that this is more an iterative challenge that will be nailed eventually. 2025 has no doubt been a rough year so far for the upper stage, but the improvements coming with the next generation vehicle soon are many. This year we'll still hopefully see Starship being caught right out of the air by the new tower at Pad 2, followed by the first reuses of both vehicles together. It is absolutely mind-blowing. The challenges that I want to focus on today though are those unknowns that you have been more interested in. As it is right now, the Starship as a rapidly and fully reusable rocket is aiming to send between 100 and 200 tons to low Earth orbit. With that, they can send Starlink, tourism missions to space stations, and even space stations themselves. If Falcon 9 changed the entire game with partial reusability, Starship flips the game and the table over just with mass to orbit alone. Now, I think the most common question that comes from you guys is about handling the propellant for longer duration missions that heads deeper into space. To do that, as we know, SpaceX plans to eventually have a propellant depot vehicle that is refilled in orbit by a number of Starships. We are just starting to see progress on that at Starbase in prototypes like this test Pathfinder back in May. If you look at these big, almost cone-like structures, these seem to be hardware to support a ship docking with another vehicle, such as the propellant depot, or even another Starship. In the Mars presentation at the end of May, we got to see this animation of how two Starships would dock together as it is currently planned. You can imagine how precisely the reaction control system will need to be to align all 4 ports to each other as it comes in nice and gently like that. Remember, this sort of thing has never been done before, especially at this scale. The future is going to be wild watching this play out. The bigger question that I have though, have SpaceX been tinkering with the hardware to feed feed the propellant from one ship to another. This heavily reworked ship quick disconnect system looks like it is evolving to do exactly that, which makes sense. After all, it already needs to be used to fuel the vehicle on the launch pad, so why not also in orbit? How will they transfer the propellant though, especially given that it is all just floating around in microgravity? You can't just pump it from one side to the other because there is no gravity pushing the propellant to settle it at the bottom of the tanks. Well, they would need to artificially make it settle at the bottom for a lengthy period of time. Both ships, I suspect, would create a very gradual thrust forward. Think of what we have seen with Starship as they are getting ready for that in-space Raptor relight. That very gentle thrust from the aft section is exactly what they would need to use. Once all of the propellant is settled in the tanks, to then move the propellant from one ship to another is probably easier than you think. All they need to do is simply decrease the tank pressure for the ship receiving the propellant and increase the pressure in the other. The propellant will simply be pushed through, and I think that they could potentially get this flow moving very rapidly. So with practice, perhaps they could move the propellant within 10 minutes or so. The faster they can do it, the less pressure that they need to vent off to actually have the propellants settling in the tanks. How they control that tank pressure is very interesting, and you guys have got loads of questions around this as well. The tank pressure is all largely controlled by Boiloff gases from the propellant itself. As the cryogenic liquid oxygen and methane warms up, it boils, and those gases build up and increase the pressure inside. This is very handy for attitude control, but the only way to make sure that pressure doesn't rupture the tank is to simply vent it overboard. This is essentially what the boil-off problem is all about. After all, if you are continually venting propellant overboard, eventually there won't be any left. I dove into this topic in a lot of detail in the video linked in the description, but what we are waiting for SpaceX to share are details on how they will make boil-off essentially zero, or at least very close to zero. Essentially, by using some tricks with different pressures in the liquid oxygen and methane tanks, they can keep both propellants one common temperature. It's tricky because they need to keep the propellants above the freezing point of methane, but below the boiling point of oxygen. Even with some pressure tricks though, the propellant all needs to be kept at a very low temperature. At 1 atmosphere, the boiling point of oxygen at sea level is negative 183 degrees C, so this problem is not trivial. In space, anything hit by direct sunlight can get really hot. The International Space Station has the issue where the side facing the sun can hit around 121 degrees C, while the shaded side drops to nearly negative 160. That's around a 280 degree swing. Keeping things cold, especially cryogenic propellants, is a nightmare in that environment. One idea might be to keep the engine bay of the vehicle pointed at the sun to cut down the solar exposure over the body. Maybe they need a huge solar panel that extends out and blocks the light from hitting the tanks. The problem is, we haven't seen or heard them say anything about this in the presentations or in any of the mock-up animations or renders. Regardless of how they intend to solve this issue, in the end, passive cooling can only really get them so far. What I've really been wanting to see them talk of is an active cooling system, something that uses electrical power on board to run chillers and keep the propellant cold enough to stay liquid. Regardless of how they do it, they still need to remove all this heat, so they need radiators to radiate that heat away to space, similar to what the ISS needs to do. Honestly, I think this is the toughest problem to solve, not just for SpaceX either. The problem is even worse for anyone trying to use liquid hydrogen. Hydrogen is even trickier to manage, and at this scale, well, we've never seen anyone attempt it before. Of course, Blue Origin want to have a propellant depot in a lunar orbit. This is one of the big questions that you guys have had about SpaceX. Well, hold that thought, because before we go any further, a big thanks to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring today's video. We all know that the internet isn't what it used to be. These days, every site, app and service wants a piece of your data, whether it's your ISP snooping on your activity or advertisers building a profile on you. It's easy to feel like privacy is a thing of the past. That's where Surfshark VPN steps in. With just one tap, you can encrypt your entire internet connection, shielding everything you do from prying eyes. It's like wrapping your digital life in a layer of armor. It's not just about privacy either. Want to stream content that is blocked in your region? Surfshark has over 3,200 servers across more than 100 countries, so you can access shows, apps, or news from anywhere instantly. I'm always getting blocked due to my location for news sites in particular, so I'm switching all the time. It's super useful if you're traveling or if your favourite content just isn't available where you live. The best thing is, one account covers all your devices with no limits. Protect your phone, your laptop, your TV, it is all shared around the entire household. Plus, features like Clean Web automatically block ads, trackers and malicious links before they even get to load, so it makes your browsing cleaner and faster. Something that many may not realise is that Surfshark runs a strict no-logs policy, all ensured by their RAM-only servers. By moving all the necessary processes to RAM, that means that no information can be physically taken from the server. Even a server reboot wipes everything in RAM anyway, which is simply now part of regular security procedures. So give it a go with their 30-day money-back guarantee and support the channel while you're at it. Just head to surfshark.com/Marcus there, or use the code Marcus at checkout to get 4 extra months for free. You can also scan the QR code there on screen. Thank you, Surfshark. So yes, it's been interesting lately seeing Blue Origin's plans for their lunar missions. Almost every week I'll see someone ask why we don't refill the HLS Starship in lunar orbit after its mission is completed. First, we have never seen SpaceX talk of such a plan, but it is certainly possible. Let's run the simulation and see how Starship would go, delivering 100 tons of propellant to a low lunar orbit. You may recall my deep dive simulating payload delivery to the surface of the Moon and Mars back in April. I'm not going to recover some of the information that I used in that video to calculate how far Starship can get, but I've got a link to that more in-depth video in the description below. Essentially, with Raptor 3 that will be used on the next generation Starship, I used the stated specific impulse of 350 seconds to calculate the delta V that Starship had available with fully loaded tanks after refilling in low Earth orbit. With that, it was estimated that Starship's dry mass will be around the 100 metric ton mark. The current propellant mass was directly lifted from SpaceX's website with an estimated 1,500 metric tons. So yes, add the dry mass and the extra propellant for lunar orbit, and that is 1,700 metric tons in total. Doing the typical rocket equation math, that gives us 7,348 meters per second of delta V. If you are unfamiliar, this is a technical way to show the potential difference in velocity that a rocket can achieve. So we have our translunar injection burn all planned here using the neat game Rocket Science. This is also linked in the description if you want to check it out. As you can tell, I've had a blast tinkering with these simulations. You can see here we need to spend just a little over 3,000 meters per second of delta V on this burn. Now, this is by far the most expensive maneuver that we need to do. With this burn now complete, that leaves us with just under 4,300 meters per second, which includes a few tiny mid-course corrections along the way if needed. Like I simulated last time, we want to come into a polar orbit as based on Artemis plans. That makes the most sense. It's super fun simulating all of this. We now need to drop down into a low lunar orbit and also circularize. Now, that takes another 730 meters per second of delta V. It makes the most sense to me to have this orbit a reasonable way out so that we can maximize the solar exposure. Also, the higher up, the more signal coverage with Earth that we are going to have without interruption. So around the 750 kilometer orbit there should do quite nicely. So there we go. Imagine our propellant depot is in this orbit. As long as they get the timing right, rendezvous with the depot would take minimal adjustments, but I've been particularly inefficient with this maneuver on purpose to account for that. I now have 3,300 meters per second of delta V left. Yes, we have already used well over half, and look at the propellant left in the Starship excluding the payload propellant. Doesn't seem like a lot left, does it? Well, right now the entire vehicle mass is 524 tons. Let's just transfer off our 100 tons of payload propellant. Yes, that now makes our total vehicle mass 424 tons. Check out what that does to our remaining delta V, 4,966 meters per second. Wow, dropping all that propellant off has made a huge difference. Now, ejecting back out to intercept Earth again takes about the same as it did to lower down into this lunar orbit anyway. 740 meters per second spent, and we are back on our way to swing by Earth. With a little over 4,200 meters per second remaining, SpaceX now have a few options. If they wanted to send even more payload propellant to the Moon, they could use the atmosphere to lower their orbit gradually and drop back into a low Earth orbit without spending hardly any more delta V at all. I suspect, however, that they may want to just just have a Starship making runs back and forth in a series of missions. Well, they could, with the remaining Delta V, easily propulsively pull themselves back into low Earth orbit, or at least partially reduce their velocity for a less brutal atmospheric re-entry. If, as an example, they spent about 1600 meters per second to reduce the apogee to around 10,000 kilometers, that is only a 3-hour and 20-minute orbit, so SpaceX could make a few passes in the upper atmosphere to bleed off speed. In the end, it depends how much they want to stress the heat shield on such lunar refilling missions. We still have 2,500 meters per second of Delta V remaining, so that is easily enough to also safely come back for a tower catch. So yes, conclusion, 100 tons at a time to a lunar orbit would be simple. They could likely comfortably get 150 tons up there quite easily if they want to use the atmosphere to do more of the work to bring it back to low Earth orbit. When it comes to actually sending payload to the moon's surface though, well, we need something else very important. Yes, given that we've seen updated leg designs for Starship pop up in that last presentation, I've had a number of you wanting to know exactly how these might work. Artistic license there is pretty wild because just try to imagine how these would close up. Yep, they wouldn't. You may remember back in March I promised to dive deeper into the legs. After all, the US Air Force had submitted a notice here with the Federal Register with plans to create 2 rocket landing pads on Johnston Island out west of Hawaii. Apparently this is all to do with the Vanguard program, where they seemingly want to test out the concept of delivering up to 100 tons of cargo anywhere on the planet within tactical timelines. Given that no other vehicle can contemplate doing that, currently Starship is what they would be looking at there. So with this idea, along with Moon and Mars landings, legs are required. And seriously, if SpaceX are looking to send off the first test Mars mission at the end of 2026, we should have been seeing these prototypes yesterday. Thanks to Chameleon Circuit working with us on this, the challenges become obvious when you need to build in the working mechanisms in 3D space. So we've got these 2 leg designs, the old ones that SpaceX have teased in 3D models for years, and these new versions that look kind of cursed but seems to be a little similar in the way a Falcon 9 leg would fold up. Let's start by looking at the old leg design first, because for Earth or Mars landings the heat shield needs to be on. You need substantial pads on the feet, and you need them to extend and retract using a similar hydraulic system to this. Most importantly, it needs to be stowed and protected within the heat shield. Now, the diameter of the ship tanks is 9 meters, as is well known. Extending these legs out gives us a stance at around 15 meters to the center of those feet. Right to the tip of the feet would be about 16.5 meters. Now, it is hard to calculate what a safe tipping angle is because we don't accurately know the distribution of Starship's mass. What we can say for sure is the more propellant sitting in the tanks, the better. That's because the liquid oxygen sits at the bottom of the vehicle, and this would lower the centre of mass by quite a bit. Based on some rough assumptions, a 15-degree tilt would probably be the tipping point of no return. You can get away with a fairly naked-looking design like this for the lunar HLS, but not for a Starship that needs to re-enter the atmosphere of Earth or Mars. Getting back to the heat shielding problem, the 2 legs on the windward side of the ship needs to be covered with a heat shield. Now, looking from these angles, you can see just how far out those shielding panels need to come to cover up the retracted and extended legs. With no such thing currently tested, you can tell right away that these will add a fair amount of extra drag to the aft end. It would also create a number of new hotspots to test out to ensure that the plasma flow wouldn't burn through some of the areas that divert the flow more aggressively. Along with all of this, just think about how the legs need to attach to the body. They can't just be attached anywhere. The strong, rigid support structure of the aft dome would likely be the central attachment location. After all, it is strong enough to support the thrust of the 6 Raptor engines on that dome. Along with this though, each leg would need to have 2 lower supports as well. The ring that supports the lower aft flap may make the best sense there. There are just so many fundamental areas of the design that needs to be tested out to support legs like this. The newly teased design Chameleon Circuit worked on with us too, and as it turns out, the stance is pretty much identical. The only way to really make that stance wider, which is what I personally want to see, is to go with a more lengthy Falcon 9 style leg. Regardless, obviously the 2 that would sit on the windward side of the vehicle would need some sort of intricate and well-tested heat shield. Thinking of the end touch points that would hit the surface though, that would presumably damage such shielding, so this has its own problems. They would also, I assume, need need to have some shielding that overlaps where they are stowed while retracted, or the plasma would simply end up getting underneath them. So many questions. I had hoped the Mars presentation would shed a little light on some of this, but of course, I'm not that lucky. Regardless, I would love to know your thoughts and ideas around all of this. Let me know in the comments. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit subscribe so we get to keep making them. I love getting to talk through some of these questions that you ask, so thanks for liking what we do and leaving that interesting feedback. If you want to continue with more space goodness, check out this video here where we did the simulation of the lunar and Mars landings, or maybe these deep dive videos. Thanks for watching all this way through. As always, I will see you all in the next video.